Possibly alien disclosure.
Alien disclosure. What's alien disclosure, Basil?
Alien disclosure is disclosing aliens, obviously.
Who's disclosing them and to whom?
It's government secrets on aliens. What we haven't been told.
Exactly. Yes, I believe that there is a disclosure project. Which
Jesus, Mark, I didn't know we were going to have a quiz this morning.
Yeah. You're on the spot. I told you should have had that caffeine drink before you came on. No, I think there's a disclosure project. I must ask Andrew if he's going to be if he is involved in that. I'm not sure, but there is a project. I'm looking at his website now. He's got a lot of stuff on there about 9/11. Where did the towers go? Finding the truth. Chemtrails stroke climate change he's got on there. We should definitely get him back on to talk about some of these. Health cover-up. That sounds interesting.
Energy cover-up.
Energy, yeah. All sorts of stuff there. We covered energy stuff before as well.
We covered cold fusion here on the show.
Yes, we did.
Anti-gravity.
Now, this is interesting. We've got to... If we get to it today, it'd be nice, but otherwise we'll come back maybe another time and do it. Anti-gravity stroke black projects. That sounds ominous.
What does it mean?
Well, I know what anti-gravity is, but black projects, that could be anything. Sounds. Then we've got the moon hoax, which hopefully we're going to discuss today, and disclosure and extraterrestrials.
Yeah, we're going to be talking to Andrew about the moon landings and were they fake?
Yeah.
Were they real or were they fake?
I believe a number of people, I think Andrew's probably going to be one of them, that maintains that they weren't real.
And if they were fake, why?
What's that all about?
Yeah.
As we like to say.
Then.
I think we should also cover this, because this is quite related. Anomalies on Mars.
Yeah, that's interesting. Pyramids on Mars.
Yeah.
Faces
the
on
face
Mars.
in Cydonia.
Yeah.
We should definitely cover that. All manner of different subjects.
Sorry, what's Cydonia?
I believe it's the region. Is it the region of Mars that it's in?
Are you telling me they've named regions of Mars?
They've named regions of everywhere, yeah.
Which actually makes me think now of the Google Earth.
Yes.
You can go on Mars as well.
I believe you can,
and have
yeah.
a look around with the... It is
only from the air, obviously, because they've not mapped... There's no Google Street View car driving around Mars currently.
Well, I kind of thought there was. Oh, no, it's from the air, you're right.
Yeah.
But isn't there a buggy there that's going around?
There is, and you can see some pictures and stuff from there.
You can see a bit. It's interesting.
It's all right, I suppose, if you like that kind of thing.
I know a man who's been there.
Do you really? We're having him on the show, we hope.
Yes, Andrew.
Andrew Di Basiaggio.
Correct.
If I get that right.
You did.
Unlike yourself.
Yes.
We're hoping to get somebody on who claims to have been to Mars.
Andrew, well, there's a station up there. I guess if it's in space and it's a station, you could call it a spation.
A spation? You could if you were dyslexic with your mouth.
But yeah, he claims to have teleported to Mars, and they have a station there and some personnel, and there are indigenous species to Mars.
Ooh. Oh, well, maybe we'll ask Andrew about that.
Yeah, we'll ask the other Andrew, see if he knows anything about that.
Of course, they're all called Andrew. It's really handy when everybody's got the same name.
Well, even if they don't, we could all call...
We just call them Andrew.
Well,
maybe we'll refer to all the guests as Andrew. It's easy. We had a spate of Pauls.
Yeah,
we've had
did.
3 Pauls so far.
They're like buses. You get 3 Pauls in a row, and then you get 3 Andrews.
Yeah. Who's going to be next?
3 Horatios.
3 Horatios, yeah. Who can forget those crazy episodes?
Is there anything else we could tell the listeners about Andrew before we actually have him on?
Well, he's been talking on this subject on various shows and tours and things. He's got some events coming up, actually, which I'll probably plug for him on his before he comes on. If I can just find them on his website.
He's quite a well-qualified gentleman.
He is. He does, well, all manner of different things. Let's have a look here. I'm just looking for the events on his website there. Where are we? He's got some events in May, I think. I'm just trying to find the events listing there, but he's got events in May where he's doing talks and things. But we'll get Andrew to give the dates for those.
He does talks on
here we are. Penzance Truth Action. That's Penzance in Cornwall, in the UK.
UFO Disclosure and you.
Yeah, May 3rd, 2012. New Horizons, 21st of May 2012. The Earth, but not as we know it. Captain.
Penzance, that is it?
No, that's the first one. I'm not sure where the New Horizons one is, but should be interesting anyway. It's all good stuff.
Excellent.
Right, I imagine what we'll do is we'll play a little bit of music and then we will call him afterwards.
Okay.
If anybody out there's got any royalty-free music that they want to have played on the show, please do get in contact, because until you do, we're going to continue to play god-awful instrumental music. And we apologise not, because, well, that's all we've got.
There's nothing much to do on Dagobah, so I mostly listen to Basil and Mark on their Out There Hour show on Alternative Future Radio.
Enough of that, enough. Right, we apologise for the music again and quite profusely. On the line, we hope to have Andrew Johnson. Do we have you live on the line?
I am here.
Hurrah!
Great.
The technology worked 1 week more. Hurrah.
For once.
We're not having techno fails this week, which is nice. So, Andrew Johnson, we gave you a little bit of an intro there, but perhaps you can probably do a better job than us. What are you all about?
Oh, well, I don't know if I can do a better job than you guys, but I'll try.
I assure you can.
Well, I sort of class myself as a pretty ordinary person, really, and I've just had an interest in, probably some of the topics that you cover for most of my life, really.
Yeah.
I suppose, the usual story that I tell is I had a UFO sighting when I was about 10 years old.
Ooh.
And that it wasn't anything, sort of spectacular. It was basically, a star in the sky that kept on moving in a way that I knew it shouldn't,
Yeah.
And somebody else was there with me. We were just coming out of a youth club that we used to go to. It was about sort of 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. And that was in about 1975 or 1974, around about then, that sort of time. And, and so I've always been interested in sort of ghosts, paranormal, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And had another sort of sighting of a strange thing in the sky it was about 1990, but I never really found out what that was. And then I was the only one there at that time. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning when I stopped off somewhere to have a break from driving, and then I suppose the next thing was 2003 when I found out about the the Disclosure Project, which was Stephen Greer's initiative in 2001 to bring forward some of these highly qualified witnesses to UFO events and black projects and so on. And I, basically that happened in 2001, and it was a big event held at the National Press Conference Club.
Yeah.
And I didn't find out about it until 2003.
Yeah, I saw some footage from that, actually, and I didn't hear anything about it at the time at all. It was years later when I heard about it. Carol Rosin spoke at that, didn't she? Is that the same event?
Correct, yes, she did. And she was one of the sort of highly qualified witnesses, because she used to work for she used to work on the MX missile for the Fairchild Industries, I think it was, she used to work for. And, basically my view at that point in 2003 was, well, I know there's a cover-up, there is no doubt, because this was a significant event, and I never heard anything about it, at all. And so I knew at that point there was a cover-up, and that's when I started to do a lot more research into these topics. And that really had coincided with, the sort of broadband internet revolution, which was really starting to take hold.
Yeah.
And we got broadband in our area. I've lived in the same house since then. I've lived in this house for 13 years. So that was when we were getting the broadband coming into our area, and it was becoming affordable. You could actually sort of buy it at a reasonable price or get rental agreement and so on. And so I then really started getting into that, and I started researching into the Disclosure Project and some of the UFO material that I'd heard bits about, like the Rendlesham event. I'd heard bits about that, and found out there was a lot more information had become available. And that was the starting point really to bring me to where I am today. And I ended up setting up a website, checktheevidence.com. I think I set that up in 2006 or something, or maybe 2005, and I've just been adding stuff to that really ever since.
Andrew, you mentioned the Rendlesham event. What is that?
Oh, the Rendlesham event.
Rendlesham.
Basically that was in 1980, and there were twin military bases in Suffolk there was Woodbridge, the base at Woodbridge, and the base at Bentwaters, and I think it's in between those two, or just adjoining them. There is Rendlesham Forest, and in 1980 an object landed, and the people from the base went out to look at it. Jim Pennison actually went up and touched the object, and he wrote notes about it. And there were many witnesses to this case. And there's lots of information being published about it now. And one of the main reasons for the information coming out was from a chap called Larry Warren, who now lives in Liverpool. He's from New York originally, and he was 19, working as a security policeman at the base. And he had some very strange, accounts to tell, and people wouldn't believe him. So he eventually, not quite sure how he did it. He forced the U.S. Air Force to release a memo that was written in 1980 by Colonel Charles Holt, who's the deputy base commander. And within that memo, Holt outlined the events which took place over 2 or 3 nights, and it was something landing, shining beams down from the sky, Colonel Holt's feet when they were walking through the forest, and they went out and took samples of the tree, and found indentations on the ground and bits of branch broken off, and that's all on record now. And they've sort of tried to say, oh, nothing happened, but it's very, very clear that something very significant did happen. And one of the key people that investigated the case was Lord Hill Norton, who was the former Chief of Defence Staff. He was an admiral in the Navy, I believe, right, before he sort of retired.
Right.
He died now. He died, I think, in 2006. But he did a lot of investigation, and he said that, he basically said that the British Ministry of Defence's position, and he used to work for them, as a top guy, he said their position was ridiculous. It was clear that something of defence interest happened at that base. Either a flying saucer landed, a craft landed and did stuff, or the guys were all lying about what they saw.
Oh, you've answered the question. I was going to say, what was the nature of the object? Does anybody know?
Well, actually, as it turns out, there was probably more than one object. There was at least one object that landed, which was the object that Jim Pennison went and touched, and I believe that was triangular in shape, and it was roughly, I think it was about 15 feet across. It wasn't very big.
My God.
And he actually touched this thing, and he got sort of a sensation from it. And he said there were characters on the side.
Oh my God!
There's a documentary called UFO Invasion Rendlesham, which is very good. I think you can watch that on the internet. Somebody's put it on YouTube.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's done by the Sci-Fi Channel. And it was made in 2005, I think. And Bryant Gumbel, who's I think he was one of the main anchormen on CNN for a time. He's one of the main news guys. He's an incredible guy, in other words.
Yeah.
He fronts that documentary. A lot of information in there. It's very well made. It's not one of these that debunks it. They clearly prove that something happened. And anybody who thinks otherwise, like, Ian Ridpath and these other people who try and debunk it, it's just nonsense. We know that something happened there. They tried to shut people up. They tried to shut Larry Warren up. They banned his book. When that documentary, which was 90 minutes long in the States, was shown here, it was shown on Sky, and they cut it down to about 50 minutes. They cut most of it out.
Oh, weird.
They showed it here.
Now,
so...
Andrew, they made audio recordings, didn't they, I think, at the time? Are they available? Can you listen to them?
Oh yeah. Just put Colonel Holt. I think if you just put Colonel Holt tape into Google, you'll get that whole 20-minute tape from somewhere. I've got it on my website. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, saved it on there.
I'm sure I'd listened to them, but I wasn't sure if they were out there yet. Lovely.
Yeah. It's all out. It's all out there. There's plenty of information out there.
And I suppose, is it worth asking the question? I think I know the answer, but is there anything special about Rendlesham Forest Base?
Well, apparently it has got a history. I'm not an expert on this, but for example, there were one of the things that's in Larry Warren's book is there were some cloudbusters there, which this ties in with the research of Wilhelm Reich.
Oh, right.
They had these cloudbuster units there, which are just like these sets of pipes, which you rig up in a particular way.
Yeah,
and it's meant to be able to affect the weather. Now, again, I haven't looked into it that much. And then again, they say that the forest has certain ley lines which well, I don't know if the ley lines go through it, but there's supposed to be there's certain things in the forest which people have talked about in the past, but I don't know that side of it very much. I haven't looked into it, but the one of the key things is that the Bentwaters base, they had nuclear weapons there in 1980, and they were stored there without the knowledge of the government, or without the disclosed knowledge of the government anyway. Yeah. And that was one of the reasons why they didn't want to talk about it. A lot of the people, Colonel Holt certainly didn't want to talk about it, because part of the account involved the beam coming down from the craft going into the nuclear weapons storage area. And we have people on record saying that these beams actually affected the ordnance. They changed the launch codes which are programmed into these units, and they had to get a special team from Germany to come in and actually reset these launch codes. Apparently, that's the story I've heard.
And of course, back in the early 80s, they would have been thinking it was more likely to be Soviet at the time.
Yeah, that's it. And I'm sure they went through all of that. And if you look at what Jacques Vallée has said about the incident, he reckons it was some type of covert black project to test how a nuclear armed base would react to an incident like that involving advanced technology. It wasn't. There was just a helicopter flew over and shone a spotlight. There was objects breaking into pieces and things flying off, in different directions, and things caught on radar at different times, and all kinds of stuff. And many witnesses, who, as Hill Norton points out, he said that these are trained observers. Their job is to observe the sky for, either for aircraft and so on, and make sure that the base stays secure and all this sort of thing. So these were fully trained people. So it's on a different scale to a lot of the other events.
Andrew, just mentioning your experience when you saw something unusual in the sky when you were a young man in the 70s and the 90s. But how do you know if it's how do you know the difference between a meteor or a shooting star? Or what is unusual? How would an untrained person know?
Well, at the time, I'd always been very interested in astronomy and so on. So I was fairly up on.
What should be there?
With the space program, and this particular object was doing acrobatics. It looked like a star, but there were actually two objects, I should say, and they were spinning. It was almost like they were moving like flies would, perhaps. They were actually going forwards and around each other.
Okay, I see.
And sort of moving off into the distance. So it wasn't a linear motion.
Yeah.
Or anything like that. It wasn't. They weren't flashing, as I recall. They were steady. So it wasn't plain navigation.
Even I know that a shooting star or a meteorite would just be moving very, very slowly in a straight line.
Right, so it was clear to see these weren't ordinary objects.
That's weird.
And there was a person with me at the time, a girl from the school that I went to. She saw it as well, so it wasn't just me seeing things.
I imagine. Could you gauge the speed? Would you have any idea? Did you think about it?
Not really. It wasn't. It didn't just shoot across the sky in 1 second. I probably saw it for the apparition for 9 or 10 seconds, something like that. So, it wasn't instant. It appeared to be manoeuvring in some way, if I can put it that way.
I want to ask you about the moon landings, but before we go on to that, I wanted to ask you, did you see all the reports over the last week or so, especially the one last week, about the fighter jets scrambled in the UK? And there are lots of theories going around about why they were scrambled so quickly and why they broke the sound barrier over land. Have you heard anything about that? You would be the man to ask, I think.
Yeah, I heard the story, and also there was an earlier story, I think about 6 months ago, that was similar. There was I think it was around the Scarborough area, that sort of area where where windows shook and doors shook, and they claimed that it was a NATO jet on manoeuvres over the North Sea, going causing a sonic boom.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know, but there are a few oddities with that story. For example, the claim of that story from last week is that a helicopter had sent out a distress call on the wrong channel, and then these jets were scrambled because this had signal coming on the wrong channel.
Yeah.
And then apparently they escorted this helicopter away. Now, let's think about that, shall we? Well, we've got a Tornado jet, I think it was. And
I think they were Eurofighters, weren't they?
They might well have been.
I think they were. Yeah, I saw some footage of them flying. I think they were Eurofighters.
Right, but even so, I don't know what the slowest flight speed for those is. It's got to be
pretty fast, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, because in other words, what I'm saying is that a helicopter can obviously hover, and I think a helicopter's top speed, obviously depends on the make, but I wouldn't imagine it's more than about 200 miles an hour.
The fastest production helicopter, I think, is the British Army Lynx. I think it's 165 mile an hour.
Oh, well, that's
trivia
pretty
fans.
there. Yeah, so, I mean, I'm not an expert on aviation technology, but I would, I know bits and pieces, and so how can a jet, which probably would stall at that speed, accompany a helicopter? So that particular detail doesn't make a lot of sense.
No.
This happened across a wide area. These sonic booms affected a large area. I know somebody in Cirencester, and he says their door rattled when this thing went off last week. So, but what it actually was, I don't know. I don't really believe the sonic boom story. But having said that, I don't know what it was. And we've had a number of these events of strange noises heard around the world. There were some YouTube videos went up, I think it was at the end of last year, beginning of this year, apparently from all around the world. Now, again, some of these videos appear to be copied from other ones. Yeah. So you're getting the same sequence of sounds in some of them. Yeah. But nevertheless... again, I had somebody writing to me and saying they were in London and it was 2:00 in the morning, and they heard like sounds of rails being moved and dragged, railway lines, like long rumbling metal clanging.
Yeah, I think I've heard noises like that on videos myself. Yeah, very high pitched, almost grinding noises.
Right. So, again, there seems to be something going on. Yeah. And I have my own theory, but again, it might be might just be ridiculous. I don't know.
You can put it forward if you like. We'll listen to you.
Well, it really sort of goes quite a distance away in some sense, because you've got to look at Rick Clay's research as a starting point to do with the 2012 Olympics.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Rick Clay, who's deceased, is that the one you mean?
Correct, yes, indeed. Sadly, yes, he was 26 or 28 when...
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And his research is very, very interesting, and I think he was definitely onto something. Mm-hmm. And, I'd advise listeners to go and check it out and watch Transition of the Ages, or listen to the interviews on Red Ice. If you just Google Rick Clay Red Ice,
yeah.
I think there's stuff linked from there.
He just seemed to be tying up some the names of streets with the 2012 Olympics and this kind of thing. It's a bit probably Andrew would know more about it than me.
Well, that was part of it, and he was looking at this idea that there is this secret. Well, I know there's a secret group running the planet. I have absolutely no doubt about that. I don't know who they are.
Right.
I don't know what the names are and stuff. Lots of names given, but that was essentially the basic premise behind Rick Clay. They're doing something, and they're doing it in a sort of an occult, a subconscious level.
A ceremony.
Going back to this, so that's what you think maybe these noises are tied into?
It's to an extent, and I'll get to that.
Yeah.
Because I'll just mention a couple of things that are worth knowing about what Rick Clay pointed out.
Yeah.
In terms of the Olympics,
yes.
If we remember the 1972 Olympics, one of the things he points out about that is we had the murder of the Israelis, the Israeli athletes.
Yeah.
And do you know how many there were that were murdered?
6 or 33.
There's actually 11.
Was that in Munich?
I think it was in Munich.
I think I went there.
There's a movie about it recently.
Yeah.
And do you know the name of the group that claimed responsibility or claimed that they did it? Do you know the name of the group?
Was it Black September?
Correct, Black September. So we already have a September the 11th, theme in that.
That's interesting.
And he points out a number of things like that, Rick Clay, in this. And then the other thing that happened, which gets more onto the noise bit, is that at the end of the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles, the closing ceremony, a flying saucer landed with lights flashing, and an alien gets out and says, he likes what he sees.
I remember that, yeah.
Can I just ask the question, this is a bit slightly off topic, was Steven Spielberg in the 1984 Olympics, was he involved in that? Because I know John Williams did the music.
He could well have been. I don't know.
Yeah. Because you know what Steven Spielberg's like. He's a bit of a pro, and he could stage something like that.
Well, it's possible that they got him to help with the production of the model, but it looks very realistic, and you can see the video. The video is on YouTube, so again, if you just put 1984 Olympics closing ceremony.
Actually, didn't I hear that? Who was it? Was it Steven Spielberg that was involved in the London 2012 Olympics, the opening ceremony? Oh no, he bottomed out, didn't he? Didn't he bottle out?
I don't know.
I think he was the first option for organising the opening ceremony, and he said he'd do it, and then he changed his mind. I'll have to Google that. I'm sure he said he would. Yeah,
you could be right. It wouldn't surprise me because a lot of these people seem to be involved. But anyway, why I was bringing that up is the other thing that Rick Clay pointed out is if you go and look at the London Olympic Stadium video when they were building the stadium.
Yeah.
You can clearly see what he says, that the way they've done this, it's all done with CGI, computer graphics, and they have the site of the stadium, and you're flying over towards it in a helicopter, and you see this big sort of top of the stadium, which actually looks like a flying saucer, flying into place and landing in the arena, where the arena is. And then you see these other little objects which look like little flying saucers flying around it, and all these streamers and stuff. And then you have one of the shots is looking towards Battersea Power Station with the four chimneys, which are like 211s, as he points out. So he's looking at all the symbolism and all this idea. And if you look at what, we mentioned Carol Rosin earlier on, and what she said was that she was told by Werner von Braun that he'd have all these threats coming up in the next few years, and at that time it was the Soviet Union, the Cold War, and all of that.
Yes.
And after that, it would be the terrorists.
Yes.
Which was 9/11.
Which we've had.
And after that, it would be the asteroids that we need to worry about, and that's also been talked about quite a lot now.
Right.
Not a whole, not as much as 9/11, of course, but it's been mentioned.
It's been increased a lot though recently. There's been a few documentaries about that.
Right, and again, the whole alien thing, I've been watching since 2003, and I've seen The Sun, the Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph.
Yeah,
they've all started to ramp the alien stuff up now, and they're not just. Sometimes it's still the old ridicule nonsense, but sometimes it's more. What's this?
Oh, it's a real possibility now.
I mean, The Sun covered the jet planes we were talking about earlier, but the next day they also had a story about the same
UFOs.
thing happening in Marbella. I think it was.
The Sun was
UFOs.
The Sun was mentioning that it could have been a possible UFO sighting.
Yeah, they seem to be very big on it.
That was odd.
Very strange.
Right. And also, for example, the thing that I pointed out a couple of years ago, I think it was 2007, they had a Larry King Live special. They had about 3 or 4 in quite close proximity to one another on the UFO stuff. And on one of them, they had Robert Jacobs. Robert Jacobs was an optical instrumentation officer in the Air Force, and his mission was to film an Atlas rocket going through all 3 stages of powered flight. This is in the Disclosure Project video. Yeah. And that was in, I think, 1967. And he basically, to cut a long story short, he filmed, without realizing it, an object coming in and firing a beam of light at this dummy warhead and knocking it out of space.
Right.
And that's all on record, all well documented. His senior officer verifies the story is true, and so on.
Yeah.
We haven't got the actual video from or the film from the telescope that he had, because that was a film of a missile test. But
yeah.
And then what I'm saying is that he first publicly told that story, which is an amazing story. He first publicly told it on local radio that he used to be on in 1982. And he's told it several times in between in public, even though he's supposed to be breaking, oaths and so on.
Yeah.
He's been told it several times since 1982, and yet it was only covered on CNN 26 years later in 2008.
Wow.
So why has it taken CNN or whoever 26 years to put this on mainstream primetime TV?
Yeah.
And there were several other witnesses like Robert Salas, who also had a similar encounter with nuclear missile shutdown.
Yeah.
And he was on the CNN special as well. And he's and this was like 7 years after Disclosure Project.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that if we tie together what Rick Clay looked at with the Olympics,
yes,
and we tie together the pattern that's been developing in the media,
yes,
and we tie together the statement of Carol Rosin, I think there is clearly, to me, an agenda to say, we've got to get the aliens into people's,
subconscious
and so on, and make them think about it, and to cut to the punchline, what Rick Clay was talking about, and I think he's onto something, is that they're going to fake an alien landing or an invasion at the Olympics.
Yeah.
Possibly with one of two scenarios. I mean, I don't know whether this is going to happen because a lot of people have talked about it now. You know, Ian Crane's talked about it a lot.
Yeah.
You know of Ian Crane, and he's done whole presentations on it. And so I don't know. Maybe they'll do something different, but there's something that they're trying to put forward with this idea of aliens. Either that it's going to be they're going to blow up a building like they did on 9/11. They're going to turn it to dust, which is a whole other area of research. And then say it's these bad aliens did it, or they're going to have some type of landing event which is not real, not real. They've got technology to actually make it look real to all the witnesses that are there, but it's not. And they're going to say, "Oh, the Space Brothers, have come to sort us out because we're making such a mess of things." And they're all going to look after us. But actually, again, they're not the Space Brothers. They're somebody else. A bit like in Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End story. That also presents some type of scenario similar to that as well. So all I'm saying is just keep your eyes and your ears open and don't believe the immediate thing that's presented. There's probably going to be another story behind it. And I think if you start looking around now, you'll be able to uncover some threads of what that story might be.
Well, just speaking of Rick Clay, 26 years old, what happened to him, Andrew?
Well, the story is that he'd been doing this research, and I think there's two different stories, as I recall. One is that he'd become depressed and he committed suicide. And the other one is that he developed some type of adrenal gland problems, which ended up being fatal. But apparently, according again to the sources that I've read online, he was buried on September the 11th.
Oh God!
Or his ashes were scattered on September the 11th.
Oh, for God's sakes.
I think 2008.
Oh my God!
So that's the story I read. I don't know if that's somebody just trying to make it more weird than it actually was, but there's not a lot of information as to what actually happened to him. It's a bit of a mystery.
Okay, thanks, Andrew.
Andrew, going on to now the moon landings. I was going to segue from your Atlas rocket, but I wanted to carry on listening. Moon landings. We introduced you. We were going to talk about Disclosure Project, which you've covered a little bit of. Moon landings, various theories about the moon landings saying that they didn't happen. I looked on your website, you've got a few videos there about the problems that they would have had if they were trying to do it. Tell us, what's your opinion of the moon landings? Have they ever been?
Well, give a bit of background to me as well, because my background is actually in software engineering. I've worked with technology, since finishing university. I did a degree in computer science and physics, so I do have a background in a scientific discipline, an engineering discipline, which software is. So, and the reason for that really is that I was inspired by the Apollo missions when I was a child. And I sat and watched the on the edge of our settee, the moonshot video, films and so on, and that was really what inspired me. And I really believe that these were just as we were shown. Probably up until about, I would say, probably 2005, I didn't really have that many reservations. So I must sort of preface everything else I'm going to say that I believe the official story. I believe the official story of a lot of these things, and I didn't think they could possibly have hoaxed something like a moon landing, because so many people saw it, and everyone says, there were thousands of people involved in the actual project, hundreds of thousands even, and I think, how could they possibly, fool all of those people? But I think, as I say in the presentation that I put together, and it was last year or the year before, there are many oddities that come to the surface, and one of the things you have to remember as well is that they didn't fake the whole program. In other words, it wasn't that there weren't any astronauts and there weren't any rockets. It's clear that the rockets, the Saturn V rockets, went up into the sky, and I feel at the moment that they probably went into orbit as well around the Earth, at least some of the missions. But we see once you get, the difficulty of getting 3 men in a capsule into orbit is actually for the 60s, was still a big challenge. So you've still got a lot of technology and expertise and engineering problems to be solved just to do that. You could argue that 3/4 of the engineering problems would need to be solved to get them into orbit. Yeah. As would be to get them to the moon. I'm just talking off the top of my head, but you can see my point. It's still a complicated thing. So you can still have an Apollo program, but not necessarily one that got to the moon.
Mm-hmm. What stopped them getting to the moon?
Sorry?
What stopped them to getting to the moon? Technology aside, or is it mainly hinged on technology then? What would have stopped them?
Well, again, you start to look into who actually said what about it, and you go again back to Werner von Braun. And if you go and look at his book, I think it was written in, I'll just try and find the actual date. It was written in 1953. Yeah, I think it was 53. Let's have a look. There's a documentary called Apollo 0.
Yeah.
And
have you got a link to that on your website? I think I saw that on there, did I?
I think it is on there, yes. Yeah, and von Braun said, I haven't got the date on this thing, I should have really, but what he said in I think it was 1953, it is commonly believed that man will fly directly from the Earth to the moon, but to do this, we would require a vehicle of such gigantic proportions that it would prove an economic impossibility. It would have to develop sufficient speed to penetrate the atmosphere and overcome the Earth's gravity, and having travelled all the way to the moon, it must still have enough fuel to land safely and make the return trip to Earth.
Yeah.
Furthermore, in order to give the expedition a margin of safety, we would not use one ship alone, but a minimum of 3. Each rocket ship would be taller than the New York's Empire State Building, almost a quarter of a mile high, and weigh about 10 times the tonnage of the Queen Mary, or some 800,000 tons. That's from his book, Conquest of the Moon, which I think was, there don't seem to be any copies available now, but
yes,
you can. I'm sure there'll be some, and that was in the 1953. So even he was saying that you couldn't really do it very easily with basic chemical rockets,
right?
And there's other little things that you can just think of. Somebody mentioned this to me the other day. If you think of the relative strength of gravity on the Earth and the Moon, it's meant to be 1/6.
Yeah.
And we need that huge rocket to get away from the Earth's gravity. Again, I haven't done the calculations, but you think how puny the lunar module thing was to get off the surface of the moon,
absolutely,
and back to orbit. You've got to start asking yourself some questions about that. Apparently, they've lost the blueprints for the lunar module as well. They no longer exist.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody came up with this phrase of the lost technology of the 60s, which is actually Dave McGowan, who's written articles about this.
I know him well. He's the strange case of Laurel Canyon. He does as well.
Right, exactly.
He's fantastic.
Yeah, he's good at sort of picking these things out and saying, well, isn't this obvious sort of thing, And again, in the presentation I put together, you look at the history of Apollo as well. And you look at the fact that Gus Grissom, who was meant to be the first man on the moon, when he got involved in the program, it was in 1967. He said, I can't hear a word you're saying. Jesus Christ, I said, how are we going to go to the moon if we can't even communicate between 2 or 3 buildings when they're in a test, in the main module? And that was in 67. So he believed they weren't in a state to go. And he had a press conference, and there was also an inquiry as well into the state of the program, and that's covered in this Apollo 0 film.
But yes, but it's interesting, Andrew. I take on board what you're saying about just getting into orbit and back was a struggle enough. But why is it then that they are pretending that they landed on the moon? What's the reason?
Well, we'll go to that in a minute. We'll perhaps cover a few more of these points of evidence, and then go to the motive, because one of the common things, it's a bit like with 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
When you tell somebody about 9/11 that it wasn't terrorists that were involved, it was actually an energy weapon which destroyed the World Trade Center.
Right.
They'll say, well, that's just ridiculous. Why would they want to do that? What would be the reason, and so on, and then they don't think about it. But again, you've got to start with the evidence and go forward, and then eventually, once you've studied enough of the evidence, you may be able to have a better chance of determining what the actual motive is for putting out a different story, and so on.
Right.
And just looking at what happened to Grissom and his colleagues were killed in a fire in the Apollo 1 capsule on the launch pad when the capsule was flooded with pure oxygen.
Yeah.
And Scott Grissom, who was his son, he then tried to open an inquiry into his father's death, I think in the 80s or 90s, I can't remember exactly when. And he basically came to the conclusion that his father was murdered. In other words, they'd set up the capsule deliberately so that a fault would cause a fire and they would all be killed. And that was basically the conclusion he came to.
Right.
So and again, you look at who developed the Apollo rockets, and it was all these Nazi scientists from the Nazi regime. Yep. So, as I say in the presentation, you're not in good shape. You haven't got a good sort of basis for people telling the truth about what they're doing. So you've already got some problems there. And then also, thinking of coming back from the moon, the way that these things were supposed to have landed in the sea, how did they ever find, it could have taken them 2 weeks sailing to get to where the guys were,
I thought about that, actually, when I've seen the footage. It seems very unlikely that they should land so close to a battleship. I mean, the Pacific is big.
That's right, and there's little things like that you can start to think about. Yeah. And another point is that there's a guy called Bill Kaysing. He's dead now. Bill Kaysing was one of the early whistleblowers. He started blowing the whistle, I think, in the 1980s, and he basically wrote a book. I think it's called "We Never Went to the Moon." I haven't read that book, but I understand that in it there's a chapter where he had a whistleblower came to him. And he was a pilot of a C-130, and he said that what they had in the back of his C-130 was the capsule, with the guys in it, and they pushed it out of the back of the plane. So they didn't land it in the ocean. Of course, I mean, again, I said earlier on, did they go into orbit? I think they went into orbit, but even did they do that? I don't know.
Yes.
And another thing that commonly comes up that I put in the presentation as well is, which some people say, well, okay, Andrew, let's say they faked it, but of course they were in a space race with the Russians, so surely if the Russians had found out, they would have said, you Americans, you're just making this stuff up, and here's the evidence, and they would have published it. The problem is that if you go and look at David Percy's film, which is What Happened on the Moon, with I'm trying to remember her second name. It was David Percy and Mary Bennett.
Right.
If you go and look at their film, and they wrote a book called Dark Moon.
Okay.
They also look at the story of Yuri Gagarin and he was supposedly the first man in space. And they went and researched what actually happened during that that mission. And they actually stopped the launch sequence for about 30 minutes and went up and adjusted bolts on the capsule.
Yeah. And
then said that, yes, we've sorted all the bolts again now. We can resume the countdown. And apparently then off Gagarin goes into space, and everyone whoopee-doo. But in 1999, it was revealed in a BBC Horizon program that Yuri Gagarin did not land in his capsule. He actually ejected from his capsule and parachuted down.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in a Horizon program. There's an article about it on the BBC website. So what did Gagarin actually do if we're looking at this sequence from the David Percy film?
So is it equally a case that the Russians also didn't have any success in space?
Well, I don't know about having any success in space, because we know, for example, the later missions in the Apollo Soyuz mission, I don't think that was faked. I think that was real. Mm-hmm. But that particular mission with Gagarin, I don't think they were necessarily quite ready or quite confident that he would survive. It's possible that all the rocket technology was working quite well by then, but perhaps they weren't sure whether the radiation would be too much and it would kill him.
Okay.
But at that time, in the scheme of things, because they'd set up this scheme, and I'll come on to why this goes back to the motive, I think, which you wanted to know about, and I'll give my thoughts on that when I've told you this bit. But basically, if we imagine that the people running the planet, were seeing that they needed to have some type of space exploration going on because people were talking about it a lot. Technology was advancing, and so on. So they decided to make it so that the Russians would go into space first. So they needed that mission to be a success. And again, if you go and look at the papers at the time, there were certain well-informed people who didn't believe that Gagarin went up because the way it was actually, I think, reported. I forget the exact story, but it was reported live one day, and then a guy actually heard it again the next day, even though it was supposed to have been live. And it was reported live the next day as well. And this guy was actually a London journalist said, no, that's not right because he's already up there. He's supposed to have gone up yesterday. And so people actually doubted that Gagarin had gone up. So I think they sent that up empty. And they claimed that he was the first man in space to therefore start the space race. And as you know, Gagarin himself was later killed, I think 2 or 3 years later in a crash. So again, he could never become a whistleblower if he chose to do that because he was dead a couple of years later. And again, same with the astronauts. If you're given the choice of, look, let's just say you're Neil Armstrong or you're Yuri Gagarin. Look, you're going to be a national hero, okay? But actually what we're going to do is you don't have to do anything. All we're going to do is we're going to put you in this capsule for 10 minutes. We're going to take you out after half an hour. We're going to fly you around in the plane, let you parachute down like you've done hundreds of times, and then you'll be a national hero. And all you've got to do is keep your mouth shut. What do you think?
Yeah.
What are you going to say? Same with Armstrong. You're going to be, the man that walks on the moon first, but you're not actually going to walk on the moon.
Armstrong, who now lives like a recluse.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other thing that very few people who argue, you go onto all these message boards and forums and so on, and I did this on Above Top Secret a good few years ago now.
That was brave.
Well, yeah. I mean, what I'd watched was Bart Sabrell's film, which is called Astronauts Gone. No, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. He's done 2 films. A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon and Astronauts Gone Wild. And again, if you want to know who went to the moon and that, go and ask the astronauts. Go and ask them about it and see what they say about it. And when you do that, as he did, I don't agree with the methods that he used, but the results that he got were pretty interesting. And as he points out, in 1994, and you can see this, I found another video of this recently, Neil Armstrong said in 1994, and I'll get the exact, so it's on YouTube, so you can watch the actual clip.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'll just get the actual quote so I can read it out verbatim. It's not very long. It's only like 2 or 3 sentences. This is July 20th, 1994, the 25th anniversary of the supposed moon landings. Neil Armstrong addressed the crowd in the White House and said, "Today we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you we say we've only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of the truth's protective layers. There are places to go beyond belief." So that is a very, very peculiar.
It is
strange.
For Neil Armstrong to say. And I also found out that I was watching somebody came along and said, and I'll go back to ATS. When I put that on Above Top Secret, somebody came on and said, "Oh, that's just ridiculous." All he was saying was this, that, and the other. There's nothing wrong with what he said. And I'd say, well, I'm sorry, folks, but there is something seriously wrong with what Neil Armstrong said there. And in a later interview that I found out that was done by Ed Bradley in 2005, because somebody came on, Bart Sabrell was on Coast to Coast and said, Armstrong never gives interviews, and somebody came on and says, yes, he does. He does give interviews. He gave one in 2005. And so I'll go and check that out. And I found it, and it was on Google Video.
Right.
And it was a personal profile of Neil Armstrong by Ed Bradley for, I think it was for CBS. It's still on Google Video as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
And he was talking to Armstrong. It's 15 minutes on him. And Ed Bradley points out that in 1994, that same year, Neil Armstrong's marriage ended after 38 years. So I could be putting 2 and 2 together and making 5, but I'm thinking that he was going through a lot of. He wanted to disclose. He's trying to tell us something.
To give the counter arguments, I suppose, which is fair to do, is there are a few things which I've seen and heard of myself, which kind of make it look very much like we did go there. One, of course, is the mirror on the moon that they used to calibrate the distance between the Earth and the moon. That got there somehow, one would assume. And the other one is that I also have lurked in the odd astronomy forum, and I saw somebody with a reasonable telescope who managed to photograph a moon lander. It was very small, but you could tell that it looked very much like not the moon lander, the rover, one of the rovers.
Okay, yeah. I'll mention those then. So I've heard those things as well, and there are a number of things like that, of course, and the rocks, of course. Some of these I cover in the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just, before I go on to that, I'll just do the other little bit on Neil Armstrong, because I found that full speech, and at the start of that speech, the 1994 one that is, he said, I can't remember the exact words, I only found this after I put the presentation together. He said, some people have said to me that a parrot can talk, but it doesn't fly very well.
Okay.
So I'm going to keep this speech short. Now, it sounds like a funny joke and that, and everyone laughed and stuff. But you know what came to my mind when he said it? The thing that came to my mind when he said it was Gus Grissom.
Mm.
Because Gus Grissom was talking, but he never got to fly, did he? He was killed. So I think he was. That's what he meant.
He was alluding to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could be totally wrong on that, of course. You can't prove anything with that.
No,
but again, if you watch the press conference as well, they held this press conference when they'd come back from the moon, and that's all on YouTube as well. It's about an hour and a half, 2 hours long. You just watch the guys.
It's very surreal, isn't it? I've seen that.
You watched it? Yeah. It's very surreal. Right. So let's do the beam thing. Right.
Yeah.
They claim that these mirrors on the moon. First point to make is, just because even if there is a mirror on the moon, doesn't mean to say the Apollo astronauts put it there. It could have been remotely landed.
Yeah.
We've sent probes. Lunokhod was on the moon before, I think, Apollo 11 landed. Lunokhod was a Russian rover which drove around there.
Mm-hmm.
So they could have put a remotely landed package on the moon without too many problems, and that could be the mirror. So that alone doesn't prove that who one of the astronauts put it there.
Yeah.
The second thing is that if you shine a laser beam at the moon, by the time that beam gets to the moon, I forget the exact figure, but I think it's something like 7 miles wide, something like that.
It would be, I suppose. I'm imagining the people that do this kind of thing, NASA and such like, would have technology that would focus it a little bit more accurately. Maybe, I don't know. It is a long way away.
Apparently not. I've been told. I know a guy who's got a master's degree in physics, and he said that if the calculation you can do is quite simple, and I think it comes out. You just put the diameter of the beam, at the one end, and then the distance, and you can work out the diameter of the light at the other end, and so that. Also, you could have a 7 kilometer diameter to have some reflective piece of rock. Yeah. So all they're collecting back, and they're not collecting a whole laser beam. They're only collecting about 7 photons or something. If you go and look at what they actually do, it's only like 7 photons of light that they're detecting. So they could easily be coming off reflective crystalline rock.
Yeah.
They don't have to be coming off a mirror.
Mm-hmm.
That again alone doesn't prove that it's there.
Yeah.
Or that it was put there by the astronauts. So that was the beam one. And the other one, what was the other one you mentioned? It wasn't the rocks, was it?
Yeah, no, I had seen on a couple of forums people, amateur astronomers and things, the likes of you and me had photographed it.
Right. Well, what I did was, somebody asked me this question: can you see the Apollo craft on the moon?
Yeah.
Now, the lunar rover is roughly similar in dimensions to the lunar excursion module, the LEM.
Yeah.
The lunar excursion module, I think the diagonal dimension of it, if you measure it from diagonal from leg to leg, is 42 feet. Right. Yep. So I went on to. And I found out, and I've actually did a calculation. You can calculate this. This is on my website. It's very easy. It's basically an isosceles triangle.
Yeah.
Let me just find it, and I'll just get the exact figures. Okay. I've got a little section in my presentation called "In Search of Apollo Artifacts."
Yeah.
The lunar excursion module is 4.2 meters across, depending on which direction you measure it in.
It's about the size of a Volvo.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So sort of car dimensions, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And if you measure the distance to the moon, it's 385,000
kilometers. Yep.
That's just average. It goes up and down because of the apogee and perigee, or whatever you pronounce it.
Yep.
Because the orbit isn't totally circular, there's a slight difference in the distances whenever we see it.
Yep.
So you can if you imagine an isosceles triangle with the two long sides being 385,000 kilometers and the base being 4.2 meters. If you imagine that, I've got this in my presentation. You can then work out with simple geometry what angle the lunar module would subtend from Earth orbit.
Yes.
And you can match that against the resolving power of the Hubble Space Telescope, and which it is different figures. I found two different figures for what's called the resolving power, because this is a known. I went to an astronomy club for about 2 years, so I found out about resolving power and entry pupils and exit pupils and stuff like this. And basically, I calculated that you can't see the Apollo craft on the moon with the Hubble telescope because it can't resolve it. It's not that powerful enough. It hasn't got enough resolution power. You might think it has, but according to the figures that are publicly available, it can't see it. So if this guy was posting on a forum that he can see it with his telescope from the Earth through the Earth's atmosphere, I very much doubt that was true. He was probably seeing something else.
I must dig out a picture somewhere and see if I can send it to you. If I can remember which forum it was.
Yeah, if you can find it, do. But however, we can go better than that, because let's see when it was. 18th of June 2009, Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter was launched. Now, Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter was part of this supposed initiative to go back to the moon by Bush and co., which was announced on the 100th anniversary of powered flight, which was not 2004. I think it was announced. And anyway, Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter went up June 18th, 2009, and it took some pictures, and eventually the craft flew over where Apollo 11 was supposed to have landed and took some pictures, and NASA announced this with some fanfare, but they've got a special page on the LRO mission web pages showing the Apollo 11 landing site.
Yeah.
And there were various arguments about this, and there's YouTube videos being made about this, so I thought I'd have a poke round on this myself. And you can see they've got a particular picture. I've got the link in my presentation, and it gives you a view of the Apollo landing site with a little scale of 200 meters.
Yeah.
And you can see that the Apollo 11 lunar excursion module is shown as a big white smudge with 4 little white smudges around it. So I measured the number of pixels that this was using PaintShop Pro. It's a bit like a Photoshop thing. I measured the size of it in pixels, and then I used this scale of 200 meters that they'd given for this picture and counted the number of pixels that was.
Yep.
And guess what? It comes out that the lunar excursion module on their picture is about 3 times too big.
You would think that NASA would be sufficient enough with basic maths to get their scale right, wouldn't you?
And again, just go and look at these pictures for yourself, and you got a number of anomalies on these lunar reconnaissance orbiter pictures. For example, they've got two different Apollo landing sites.
Yeah.
And on one of them, the lunar rover is black, and one of them is sort of white.
Wow.
And same with the Surveyor 3. Surveyor 3 is a probe. One is black and one is white. And I've got this in my presentation. And it really doesn't add up. And they've since I did this again, they've published another picture of one of the Apollo landing sites. I think it was published last year sometime. But the lunar module again looks totally different. You can actually see it's got a little 3D effect. Yeah. Whereas the Earth one hasn't. It's just like a smudge. You can see it. But the later one, it almost looks like a little 3D model, and you can see it. In fact, it looks more like you'd expect it to look. The other one, I point out to people that if you look at this first one from 2009, if I came along and said, look, I was flying in a helicopter and I took a picture of a UFO landed on the ground.
Yep.
Showed you this picture of this smudge, that's on NASA's website, you wouldn't believe me.
No.
You just say, Photoshop that. Yet they present this as evidence of the landing.
We're getting a bit pressed for time. I have got one last question, which I've thought myself many times. Hopefully you can just give us a quick answer, if there is a quick answer. Why have they never pointed the Hubble Space Telescope at the moon?
Well, I think they might have, but if they haven't, it's because the moon is a very bright object, and the Hubble Space Telescope is primarily designed for looking at dimmer objects, and deep sky photography and so on.
Because I've seen lots of photographs where there have been elements of the moon that have been blacked out and things like that before, but it's all very mysterious stuff.
Well, they're hiding stuff. I mean, there's a whole sort of set of data which suggests that.
Yeah, well, we'll have to get you back on again, I think, and go into this some more. We can press on with this for hours, I think.
It's been fascinating. It's just been a wonderful show today. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for calling in. Andrew, do you want to plug your website? And have you got any events coming up? We gave you a little plug before you came on, but you can do it again if you like.
Yeah, website's checktheevidence.com. There's lots of audio, video and stuff that you can download from there. I've got my free ebook about 9/11, which will tell you the story of 9/11. I'm doing a talk in Penzance, if anyone's down that way, on the 3rd of May. It's going to be about UFO stuff. That's listed on the homepage. And I'm doing another one in Blackpool on the 21st of May, which is about the expanding Earth and the hollow Earth, and that's at Blackpool.
We might put them on the website, actually.
Yeah, we'll put your events up on our events page as well while we're at it.
Wonderful, thanks.
Lovely. Thank you for calling in then, Andrew. Thank you. Hopefully we can get you on again sometime.
Anytime.
Lovely. Thanks for calling.
Bye.
Cheers,
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.